Guys, today we're going to start our unit on the age of discovery and exploration. So that's SOL 4, and you can look below on your slideshow and read through what that entails. So we're going to talk about the roles and economic motivations of explorers and conquistadors, describing the influence of religion, explaining migration, settlement patterns, cultural diffusion, social classes, describing the Columbian Exchange, mapping and explaining the triangular trade, and describing the impact of precious metal exports from the Americas. So let's go ahead and get started. Motivating factors. So during this time, European countries are setting sail, they're sending explorers out to explore the oceans, find new trade routes, just to find out what was outside of their known world. And there are some factors that led up to motivating them to go do this. The first of which is God. You have probably heard in your studies and all throughout school that the motivating factors for explorers are God, gold, and glory. I'm going to change that up just a little bit, and ours are going to be God, goods, and glory. So the first is God. These European countries were Christian, whether they be Catholic or Protestant, they were Christian, and they wanted to spread Christianity. They wanted to convert new people to their religion. Remember, like with the Jesuits and the Catholics, that was a big pushing factor even within Europe, was to convert new people. So they want to continue that throughout the rest of the world. So this is the diffusion of Christianity, which I think we had talked about in class diffusion before, but that just means spreading, essentially, of Christianity. As I said, this is Protestant and Catholic countries. So next, goods or wealth. This comes in a couple different forms. First being gold. European countries had heard stories, there were myths about foreign lands that were filled with gold, essentially gold just laying around on the ground for them to find, and that was a big motivating factor for them. They wanted to go find that gold. Next is spices. So we've talked about spices before too, especially coming from the East, and how profitable and how expensive and how desirable those spices were. So these European countries were looking for their own way of obtaining these spices and kind of controlling that spice trade. And if they could, finding lands to colonize, and then they could market their own spices. They could cultivate their own spices. Next is natural resources. So natural resources is anything that was going to give them wealth. So anything that is found naturally in a place that could be of use and that could be traded and used for profit essentially falls under natural resources. And this category, this is why I'm calling it goods and not just gold, is because it included anything that was going to make these countries more wealthy. They wanted more wealth with the end of feudalism in Europe and everything, and all that we talked about throughout the Reformation and the Renaissance. Kings and countries were becoming more wealthy, more powerful, and they needed more and more wealth, or they wanted more and more wealth. So lastly, glory. So as these countries become more wealthy and as they become more independent, they want to glorify their own country. They want to prove that they are the dominant power within Europe. They're in this kind of power struggle that's both political and economic. So they were wanting to go and colonize land to expand their territory, to make them more politically powerful and relevant, and they were also looking for those resources and that wealth from those new lands to also increase their economic power over other countries in Europe. So those are our motivating factors: God, goods, glory. Next, and there's a map. Next, we're going to talk about some contributing factors that allowed them to go and explore these lands. So first, innovations in the navigational arts. These came both from Europe and from the Islamic world. We'll talk about European advancements first. This is a European ship. It was called the Carnival.
and it was a new type of ship, and it was faster and stronger and allowed them to explore new places in a shorter amount of time. It moved faster through the water, so it was a pretty big deal. So new types of shipping that they had invented, the caravel, there it is. The 3-mast. So you can see on that ship that there are 3 masts instead of just 1 mast. This also allowed them to move faster through the water. They caught more wind in those 3 sails. And then also better maps. We'll talk a little bit, in just a little bit, actually in our next video, about how they were getting these better maps, where these better maps were coming from a little bit more specifically, but they had better maps, and so they knew routes, and they knew places around the sea better. They had a better idea of where different land masses were, so that helped them sail. And lastly, from the European advancements, cannons. Not that cannons were invented by Europeans at this time, that's not what we mean, but cannons were bigger. They were putting them on these ships, and that allowed them to pull into a port really easily and put cannon fire on that port city and take over that port, especially in like India, in the Islamic world. They didn't have these cannons set up, so it really allowed them to kind of come in and conquer an area, take over the trade in that area. So Islamic advancements. There is the compass. So I think we've talked before about the compass came from the Islamic world, came from the East. Obviously, it helps you know which direction you're going, which is super important when you're in the middle of the water. Next is the astrolabe. I am not a navigator. I don't know specifically how the astrolabe works, but I know that it has to do with the stars and being able to determine which direction you are going based on the stars and also on the horizon of the water. So really complicated, especially for the time, mathematical equations going on with this, and a great knowledge of astronomy to figure this out. But it was super beneficial to explorers. And lastly, the triangle sails. So you see on that caravel ship there that there are triangular shaped sails. This allowed the explorers to sail actually straight into the wind, so you could sail into wind and you didn't have to worry about going with the wind. So it just helped them navigate better. So those are all factors that helped these sailors, these explorers, venture out into the world and actually discover these lands they discovered that were extremely far away from Europe, especially for the technology they had at the time. And then contributors, or I should say contributor, one man we're going to talk about specifically in this, and that's Prince Henry the Navigator. There is a picture of him. So Prince Henry the Navigator is a Portuguese royal, and in Portugal and Spain at the time, they had been fighting the Muslims for quite a while, and Henry had had some great military victories over these Muslims, and his last military victory was at the city of Ceuta. And this is important because at the city of Ceuta, he found 2 really important things. First, he found a library full of all of the knowledge of the Islamic world. As we've talked about the Islamic world, especially think about when we talked about the Renaissance and how all of those classical ideas and the science and the knowledge was filtering into Europe again from the East, from the Islamic world. They had great mathematicians and scientists and just great thinkers of the time. And so this library had a lot of really important information in it. Second, Prince Henry found at Ceuta was a storeroom full of spices. Remember, spices were really, really expensive at the time, and they were kind of hard to come by. So most men would have said, I'm going to sell off all these spices and make my fortune, and that will be that. I'll be a rich man. But Henry was really smart, and he said, the man who can secure a passage and continue to bring these spices into his own country will set his country up for greatness. He's saying that if I can find a way to keep continuing to bring spices in, and we can have a monopoly essentially on the trade of spices, then I will secure the fate of Portugal and we will be a great country. So what does he do? He sets up a school of navigation at Sargis. At this school, scientists and astronomers and navigators come, and they study, and they debunk myths of the time, like the ocean boils when you hit the south, or that the world is flat. All these myths that they had at the time that would prevent someone from exploring or would make it difficult for someone to explore, they debunk, and they make better maps, like I was talking about on our last slide. They map things, they come up with more accurate maps, so they really set the stage for this exploration to take place. Specifically, a couple of Portuguese explorers that we'll talk about in our next video make some pretty big leaps and discoveries, or do some pretty impressive things because of this school of navigation that Henry set up.